The sun was a faint smear of orange over the distant mountains, barely lighting the makeshift field hospital nestled in the dusty valley. The air was thick with the mingling scents of antiseptic, sweat, and smoke from distant skirmishes. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter moved quietly between the rows of cots, her footsteps almost silent against the cracked concrete floor. In the chaos of war, she had long learned the art of calm. To her team, she was just the medic, the woman who patched wounds, cleaned bullets from flesh, and offered comfort to the broken. But beneath the cool exterior, a storm of nerves and instincts simmered. The wounded moaned softly, each one a story of courage, fear, or sheer bad luck. Emily knelt beside a young private, barely 19, whose trembling hands betrayed more terror than the shrapnel lodged in his leg. "We're going to get you through this," she whispered, her voice steady and soothing. The private's eyes darted to the nearby windows, where distant shadows of enemy patrols sometimes crossed the horizon. Emily noticed, but she didn't panic. Panic was contagious. Calmness, she had learned, was far more powerful. Her fingers worked with practiced precision, cleaning and dressing the wound, every movement deliberate. She moved on to the next cot, adjusting the sling on another soldier whose arm had been shattered by mortar fire. Around her, nurses scurried back and forth, distributing painkillers and blankets, their faces tense with the weight of responsibility. Yet Emily's gaze lingered on every corner, scanning for subtle signs of danger. A sudden movement, an unusual sound, a shadow that didn't belong. She trusted her instincts more than the reports or orders. For years, Emily had trained for combat scenarios that most medics never imagined. Advanced field medicine, tactical shooting, survival maneuvers, she had done it all. But her superiors always assumed her primary role was care, not confrontation. And the soldiers, young men and women facing their first real taste of war, only saw the calming medic who brought ice packs and bandages. None of them realized the depth of her training, the countless drills that had honed her mind and body to react under fire. Tonight, though, instinct told her that her other skills, the ones they had ignored, would soon be needed. The field hospital itself was a chaotic patchwork of tents, corrugated metal walls, and hastily built barriers. Outside, the wind carried the faint sounds of distant gunfire and explosions. The valley amplified the noises of war, making every shot sound closer, every scream sharper. Soldiers in the perimeter guards shifted uneasily, their eyes scanning the horizon. Most tried to shrug off the tension, joking about the false alarms that often came in the dead of night. But Emily saw it differently. Her gut told her the enemy wasn't far. She could feel it in the subtle vibrations under her feet, in the brief flicker of unease in the soldiers' eyes, and in the distant echo of artillery fire that hadn't hit their position yet. She paused at a table stacked with medical supplies, checking bandages, syringes, and medications. Every item had its place. Every move had to be precise. In a battlefield hospital, chaos could cost lives. Yet as meticulous as she was with medicine, her thoughts drifted to strategy. If the enemy came, and she felt certain they would, she would need to defend the wounded. She had mapped every possible choke point, every corridor, every weak wall she could use as cover. The soldiers might laugh at the idea of the medic with a plan, but Emily knew it could make the difference between life and death tonight. Outside, the shadows lengthened as the sun dipped below the mountains. The temperature dropped slightly, and the wind carried a whisper of dust that stung Emily's eyes. She adjusted her scarf and wiped her brow, listening. The field hospital, for all its noise and movement, held a fragile silence beneath the surface chaos. Every footstep, every clatter, every whispered command resonated differently in her mind. She could almost hear the pattern of the coming night, like the prelude to a storm. Emily moved toward a row of cots where a young sergeant was struggling to stay awake. The man had been injured 2 days earlier, and his wounds were healing, but exhaustion had worn him thin. She sat beside him, checking his fore and adjusting his blanket. "You're stronger than you think," she murmured. He gave a small, tired smile. In that moment, Emily felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. These men and women relied on her, trusted her to keep them alive, not just with medicine, but with judgment, courage, and vigilance. As she worked, she noticed the subtle signs of an approaching threat: a faint crack in the dirt outside the perimeter, the whisper of a distant engine, and the way the wind shifted. Most would have ignored it, but Emily's mind catalogued each anomaly. Every detail mattered. The enemy had always underestimated her, not only because she was a medic, but because she exuded calm, a dangerous calm that few could recognize as strength. She smiled faintly to herself. Let them underestimate her. Let them believe she was just a healer. Tonight, that assumption might cost them everything. Hours passed. Night fell, blanketing the field hospital in darkness, pierced only by dim lanterns and the occasional flare of distant fire. Soldiers dozed where they could, leaning against walls or cots, weapons at hand. Emily continued her rounds, her hands steady, her eyes sharp. She had arranged supplies, reinforced barriers, and mentally rehearsed every possible scenario. Nothing would surprise her, not entirely. She had trained for this, and more importantly, she had survived worse than fear itself. In a small, quiet corner of the hospital, Emily paused to catch her breath. She looked at the sleeping faces around her, the exhausted soldiers, the wounded, the volunteers. Each life mattered. Each one was her responsibility. She tightened her grip on her rifle, hidden beneath her coat, and allowed herself a small thought. I may be just the medic, but I won't let anyone fall tonight. Outside, the wind shifted again. A distant shadow moved along the ridge. Emily's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. The calm before the storm was over. Something was coming. And when it arrived, the soldiers who thought they knew her role would discover the truth. The quiet, composed medic among them was far more than anyone had imagined. She was ready. And for the first time that evening, a small, determined smile touched her lips. The night would be long, the danger immense, but Emily Carter had faced impossible odds before. Tonight, she would prove that courage, skill, and instinct could turn the tide. The night was deceptively quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the canvas flaps of the field hospital. Emily Carter moved along the rows of cots, her boots silent against the dirt-streaked floor. The soldiers, exhausted from the day's engagements, were drifting into fitful sleep, some murmuring in their dreams, others staring blankly at the ceiling, eyes glazed with fatigue. To the untrained eye, the hospital seemed secure. To Emily, it was a fragile cocoon, a bubble that could be shattered at any second. And something in the air told her that shattering was imminent. The report had come just before dusk. Intelligence indicated enemy scouts were near. Most soldiers shrugged it off. False alarms weren't unusual. Inexperienced troops often mistook shadows for threats or overreacted to distant gunfire. But Emily didn't dismiss it. She crouched by a cot where a private was trying to sleep, noting the subtle tremor in his hands, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The boy's fear was palpable, unspoken. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. Rest now. Nothing's coming your way while I'm here, she whispered. He nodded, uncertain, and drifted back into uneasy slumber. Her eyes scanned the perimeter. In the darkness, shapes shifted. A fallen branch twitched under the wind's gentle push. Far off, she thought she caught the silhouette of movement along the ridge line. Could be a stray animal, could be nothing at all, but her gut told her otherwise. Years of training had taught her that instincts weren't mere hunches. They were data, patterns her subconscious mind picked up before conscious thought could catch up. Emily's instincts screamed that the enemy was closer than anyone realized. She moved to the supply table, checking weapons and ammunition. Her rifle, hidden beneath her coat, felt heavy in her hands, reassuring. Every round counted. She checked her sidearm, confirming the safety catch was secure but ready. Then she knelt beside a medical cart, rearranging supplies into tactical order. Bandages, morphine, saline solutions, everything was in a place where she could grab it without looking. Every detail mattered. Tonight, it wouldn't just be medicine that saved lives. It could be skill, speed, and sharp reflexes. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Emily sniffed the air and froze for a heartbeat. That smell, gunpowder, slightly burnt, drifting in from the distance, wasn't far off. She crouched at a window, barely moving, her breath shallow. Her eyes caught movement along the tree line, a flicker of shadow. She calculated distances in her head, noting potential approach paths, exit points, and choke zones. Every detail fed her mental map. If the enemy moved tonight, she would know where to strike first. Emily moved through the hospital, quietly observing her colleagues. Most were too tired to notice the subtle warnings she perceived. A nurse muttered to herself as she patched a wound. A young sergeant shifted nervously in a cot. Their eyes betrayed them. They didn't sense the danger lurking, but Emily did. Her training kicked in, every sense heightened. She watched for signs that the enemy might exploit weak barricades, blind spots, open windows. Each potential vulnerability was stored in her mind like coordinates on a map, ready to be activated if needed. The soldiers on perimeter duty whispered in low tones. Probably just patrols, one said, though his voice wavered. Emily listened, hearing fear in the rhythm of their conversation, in the hesitation behind their words. That fear wasn't unfounded. Skilled enemies could strike suddenly, with devastating efficiency. Emily allowed herself a mental checklist. Positions reinforced? Yes. Ammunition ready? Yes. Patients secured? Partially, she would need to move some to safer areas if things escalated. Her mind worked quickly, methodically, but her movements were calm, deliberate. Panic had no place in her strategy. A faint thump from outside drew her attention. She crouched low, eyes scanning, ears straining. Nothing obvious, but the slight vibration told her someone or something had passed by. Could be scouts. Could be a precursor to a larger assault. Emily didn't overreact, but she noted every anomaly, every sound. She moved silently to a low barricade, adjusting the sandbags and tying a few more down with rope. The night was her ally. Shadows hid her movements. The quiet magnified the smallest noises. She relied on both to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. She returned to the wounded, moving carefully. "We're okay for now," she whispered to a private shivering in his blanket. "Stay calm and listen to me if anything happens." His eyes widened, the fear returning. Emily knelt beside him, assessing his injuries again. Bandages were secure, 4 lines unobstructed. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying enemy patterns she had memorized during training, imagining routes and timing. If the enemy approached in force, she would need every piece of knowledge she had gained from drills, combat exercises, and real-world encounters. The night deepened. Stars appeared above the valley, pinpricks of light in the darkness. Emily's eyes scanned constantly, catching the glint of moonlight on metal far off in the distance. Could be nothing. Could be the edge of a rifle barrel. She didn't lower her guard. Not for a second. Her fingers flexed on the rifle, her knuckles white, not from fear, but from anticipation. Every instinct screamed that the enemy was testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses. The quiet was deceptive, masking an imminent storm. She moved to the command tent, where the officer in charge was reviewing maps and reports. "Any updates?" Emily asked softly. The officer shook his head, dismissing the intelligence as likely rumors. Emily didn't argue. She left the tent, instead reinforcing her mental map of the hospital. Every cot, every hallway, every barricade was noted. If she had to defend this place, she would do so with surgical precision. Every movement calculated. Every decision could save lives. Minutes turned into hours. The wind carried distant sounds of conflict, muffled yet constant. Emily never stopped moving, her senses sharpened, her mind a web of strategy and contingency plans. She checked weapons again. Ammunition, supply kits, barricades. Each pass through the hospital added small improvements, tightening security and control. The soldiers might have thought the night would pass uneventfully. Emily knew better. She felt it deep in her bones. The enemy was coming, and soon. She paused in the center of the hospital, glancing at the faces of her team. Exhaustion marked them, yet they relied on her calm presence. Emily took a deep breath, centering herself. Tonight, she would need to do more than administer aid. She would need to defend, to fight, to outthink an enemy who believed the hospital was vulnerable. She welcomed the challenge, letting a small spark of resolve ignite in her chest. They might see her as just a medic, but Emily was preparing to prove them wrong. Hours later, as the moon rose high, she crouched near a window again, eyes fixed on the tree line. The shadows shifted, the wind carried strange sounds, and Emily's heartbeat synchronized with the tension in the valley. She tightened her grip on the rifle. The night had grown heavy, expectant, like the pause before a storm's first lightning strike. She whispered to herself, "Stay sharp, stay alive, and protect them all." For Emily Carter, there was no distinction between medic and soldier anymore. Tonight, both roles would merge, and the first sign of the enemy's approach would mark the beginning of a night that none of the soldiers in that field hospital would ever forget. The valley seemed deceptively calm, bathed in the ghostly light of the moon. For a moment, Emily Carter allowed herself to think the night might pass without incident. But the silence was fragile, stretched thin like a taut rope ready to snap. Then, without warning, it shattered. The first gunshots cracked through the night like a whip. Bullets tore through sandbags and the thin walls of the makeshift field hospital. Soldiers shouted, panicked, and dived for cover. Explosions shook the ground, throwing dust, sand, and debris into the air. The sudden chaos was deafening, and for a heartbeat, the hospital seemed consumed by it. Emily didn't hesitate. Years of training surged forward in her mind, like a map she had memorized. She dropped low behind a barricade of overturned cots and crates, her rifle already raised. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. She had prepared for this night, envisioned it countless times during drills and simulations. This wasn't just another battle, this was survival, and she was responsible for lives far beyond her own. Soldiers scrambled across the open floor, some grabbing weapons, others dragging the wounded to safer corners. Panic rippled through them like a contagion. Emily's voice cut through it. Positions. Barricades. Protect the wounded. Her commands were sharp, decisive. Even the most frightened soldiers obeyed, drawn to the authority in her tone. They didn't fully understand that she wasn't just giving orders. She was orchestrating the defense in real time, calculating every move, predicting every path the enemy might take. The enemy came in waves, moving with coordination and lethal intent. Emily's eyes narrowed, focusing on their approach. 45 fighters, heavily armed, were advancing with a speed that would have overwhelmed anyone unprepared. They assumed the hospital would be an easy target, a collection of medics and wounded soldiers, defenseless and disorganized. They hadn't counted on Emily Carter. Her first shots rang out, precise and controlled. A rifleman fell before he could reach the barricade. Another tried to flank, only to be met by Emily's calculated counterfire. The sound of each hit reverberated through the hospital, but she didn't stop. She moved fluidly between cover points, striking, repositioning, and striking again. Every shot had a purpose. Every movement had meaning. The enemy was learning, but she was always one step ahead. Chaos reigned around her, yet Emily maintained an eerie calm. The wounded who could see her gained courage from her presence. "She's not just a medic," one whispered, eyes wide with awe. Emily barely acknowledged it. There was no time for praise. Each second counted. Each delay could cost lives. She scanned constantly, analyzing, anticipating. The enemy was skilled, but arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that a single medic could be this dangerous. Outside the hospital, distant soldiers joined in the defense, returning fire and reinforcing weak points. Emily coordinated their movements, her mind a web of tactics and strategy. She shouted precise instructions, correcting missteps before they could become fatal mistakes. One soldier froze, terror-stricken, rifle trembling. Emily moved to him, knocking him gently but firmly aside, taking his place at the barricade. She fired, neutralizing two advancing attackers before they could breach the line. The young soldier stared at her in disbelief. "She's unreal," he muttered. Inside the hospital, wounded soldiers clutched their blankets, watching the battle unfold. Emily caught the eye of one severely injured man, bloodied but conscious. She smiled faintly, the gesture carrying reassurance. "Stay down. Help is coming." She moved past him, taking calculated shots through narrow windows and broken walls, thinning the enemy's ranks. She was everywhere, and nowhere at once, a shadow with deadly precision. Every decision, every movement, was honed by experience and instinct. The enemy, realizing they had underestimated her, began changing tactics. Flanking maneuvers, rushes, and small squads attempted to breach the hospital walls. Emily anticipated them all, shifting positions like a ghost through the chaos. She used overturned beds, medical carts, and debris to channel attackers into kill zones. Her strategic mind was as sharp as her aim. Every engagement was a lesson for the enemy. They were learning too late that the medic they dismissed was orchestrating their downfall. Smoke and dust filled the air, obscuring vision and thickening tension. Explosions rocked nearby walls, and bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces. Emily's senses were at their peak. She smelled gunpowder, felt the vibrations of footsteps, heard subtle changes in breathing and movement that revealed enemy positions. Her mind processed it all in real time. Every enemy soldier she eliminated was another step toward securing the hospital, another life protected. She moved like a shadow, silent, deadly, relentless. The first wave of attackers faltered. Confusion spread among the enemy ranks. Soldiers who had initially feared being overrun now regrouped, finding courage in Emily's unwavering resolve. "Keep pushing. Cover the wounded," she shouted. Her voice carried authority, not fear. Soldiers responded, rallying behind her, moving with renewed determination. They had underestimated her, but now they were following her lead, realizing that this medic was the anchor of their survival. Hours passed in a blur of noise, flashes of gunfire, and shouted orders. Emily moved constantly, never allowing the enemy to settle or regroup. She repositioned, fired, and guided soldiers and wounded alike with precision. Her movements were fluid, almost rehearsed, yet spontaneous when unpredictability struck. Every decision balanced risk and reward. Every second held consequences. Her mind was a battlefield map, constantly updating, calculating, predicting the enemy's next move. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Emily had already reshaped the battlefield. The enemy was reeling, disoriented by her skill, their coordinated assault broken. 45 attackers had come with confidence and numbers. Emily had disrupted their momentum, decimated their formations, and protected the hospital. The soldiers who had once doubted her were wide-eyed, their respect for the medic who fought like a seasoned soldier absolute. Amid the chaos, Emily paused for a moment, taking a breath. Her rifle was still raised, her senses still alert. The hospital walls were scarred, the floor littered with debris and spent shells, but the wounded were safe. For now, she knew the enemy would regroup, and that more waves could come. But she had bought crucial time. She had proven that being just a medic was a misconception, one that her attackers would remember with bitter regret. Emily's eyes scanned the horizon once more. Smoke drifted in the distance. Shadows shifted in unexpected ways, and the wind carried whispers of the enemy's retreat. But she didn't relax. Not yet. Survival required vigilance, and victory demanded relentless focus. She moved to secure another barricade, checking ammunition, reinforcing weak points, and ensuring the wounded remained protected. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical. The ambush had begun, but Emily Carter was already thinking 10 steps ahead. Her hands were steady despite exhaustion, her mind a finely tuned instrument of strategy and instinct. The first wave had come, and she had turned it back. But the night was far from over. Emily knew the enemy would try again. And when they did, she would be ready. For Emily Carter, the battlefield was no longer a place of hesitation or fear. It was a stage for action, calculation, and courage. The soldiers who had dismissed her now understood the truth. The quiet, composed medic among them was far more than they ever imagined. She was a guardian, a strategist, and a warrior. And the ambush had only just begun. The chaos inside the field hospital was at its peak. Bullets ricocheted off metal supports, glass shards tinkled to the ground, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with antiseptic in a dizzying haze. Emily Carter ducked behind a barricade of overturned cots and crates, her rifle ready, eyes scanning every angle. The wounded huddled in corners, some screaming, some paralyzed with fear. Soldiers outside called for cover fire, their voices strained with urgency. Panic threatened to overwhelm the hospital, but Emily refused to let it spread. She took a deep breath and focused on what mattered most, taking control. She moved swiftly through the hospital corridors, assessing the situation with the precision of a seasoned tactician. Her mind catalogued enemy positions, the direction of gunfire, and the weak points in their defenses. The initial ambush had shown her the enemy's tactics, coordinated, aggressive, and assuming the hospital would crumble under pressure. They had underestimated her. They didn't know the medic they had dismissed could turn chaos into order, fear into discipline, and desperation into a calculated defense. Emily found a group of soldiers pinned down near the eastern wing, their rifles trembling, eyes wide with panic. "Listen to me?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "Move to the west barricade, cover the wounded. Fire only when you have a clear shot." The soldiers obeyed, trusting the authority in her command, even if they couldn't fully comprehend it. Emily positioned herself at the central intersection of the hospital, giving her a vantage point over the majority of the corridors. From here, she could monitor enemy movements and direct the defense. Every step she took was deliberate, each movement a combination of offense and defense. She used overturned tables and supply crates to reinforce barricades, blocking corridors to funnel attackers into kill zones she had imagined during countless drills. A soldier stumbled past her, rifle empty, sweat streaking his dirt-caked face. Emily grabbed his arm, guiding him to reload quickly and take position. "Keep your eyes sharp," she ordered. "We're not done yet." The enemy pressed on, regrouping for a second push. This time, their assault was more coordinated, but Emily anticipated it. She had studied the layout of the hospital in her mind countless times. Every window, every hallway, every doorway. Using this knowledge, she created choke points where the attackers would be forced into confined spaces. Narrow corridors, blocked passages, and strategically placed debris became tools of war. Every movement she made was designed to maximize damage to the enemy while protecting the wounded. From her vantage point, Emily observed the first signs of the enemy attempting to flank the hospital from the south. She didn't panic. Instead, she barked precise orders to the soldiers nearest that corridor. Reposition to the southern wing. Watch for movement at the corner. Stay low and controlled. Her voice carried authority, and her calm in the midst of chaos gave others the strength to act decisively. Soldiers began moving with purpose, covering the wounded and reinforcing barriers, while Emily remained at the center, coordinating like a general. She realized that the enemy had misjudged her entirely. They believed her role as a medic was passive, that her primary concern was care, not combat. Their arrogance became her advantage. Emily moved with precision, setting traps and ambush points. She used overturned medical carts to create barriers, stacked supplies to block line of sight, and shifted cots to create narrow passageways that slowed enemy advances. Every attack the enemy launched was met with calculated resistance, forcing them into positions where they were vulnerable. Despite the intensity of the situation, Emily never lost sight of her ultimate goal, protecting the wounded. She checked on soldiers pinned down, giving them instructions on how to fire without exposing themselves. She moved among the injured, ensuring they were shielded while also keeping them calm. Her presence inspired courage. Whispered reassurances, calm gestures, and precise movements made the soldiers believe that survival was not just possible, it was expected. As the enemy attempted to breach the western barricade, Emily intercepted them with precise, deadly fire. She moved from cover to cover, always one step ahead, her calculations sharp and instinctual. A soldier next to her gasped in awe as she dropped 2 attackers before they could reach the wounded. "How is she?" he muttered, voice barely audible over gunfire. Emily didn't respond. Every second was focused, every action deliberate. There was no time for admiration, only survival. Outside, the soldiers who had initially panicked now mirrored her calm. They followed her orders without hesitation, covering corridors, reinforcing barricades, and suppressing enemy advances. Emily's tactical mind was orchestrating every movement, when to fire, when to fall back, when to lure attackers into traps. She had transformed the hospital from a chaotic refuge into a fortress. The enemy, confident in their numerical advantage, found themselves outmaneuvered by the medic they had dismissed. Smoke and dust thickened the air, reducing visibility and heightening tension. Emily moved silently along the barricades, checking ammunition, ensuring weak points were reinforced, and coordinating counterattacks. She watched as enemy soldiers fell into her traps, their overconfidence turning into confusion and terror. The wounded, previously passive and helpless, now began to recognize the order and discipline Emily had created. They followed instructions, moved safely, and even assisted in minor defensive actions where they could. The assault continued, relentless, but Emily's strategy held. Her knowledge of the hospital's layout, combined with her tactical ingenuity, allowed her to anticipate enemy movements. She positioned soldiers at optimal firing points, reinforced barricades at weak intersections, and personally intercepted attackers attempting to breach critical areas. Her mind was a web of calculations, constantly updating in real time, ensuring every decision maximized the protection of life and minimized risk. Hours stretched, but Emily's resolve never wavered. She had assumed control of the battlefield within the hospital walls. Soldiers who had initially doubted her authority now deferred to her every command. "She's not just a medic," one whispered, awe in his voice. Emily didn't need their praise. She needed their focus. She needed them alive. Her duty was to protect, to lead, and to ensure that every life within these walls survived the night. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light across the valley, the enemy's momentum faltered. The coordinated assaults had been disrupted, their confidence shaken. 45 attackers had come with deadly intent, believing the hospital would fall easily. But Emily's strategy had turned chaos into controlled resistance. Her leadership had transformed fear into discipline, panic into precision. The hospital, scarred but intact, remained a fortress. Emily finally allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had taken charge, turned the tide of battle, and ensured the wounded remained safe. Her mind was still alert, knowing the fight wasn't fully over. But she had demonstrated the truth. She was more than just a medic. She was a commander, a strategist, and a protector. Her actions that night would etch her into the memory of everyone who witnessed them. And in that quiet moment, as the first rays of sunlight touched the hospital walls, Emily Carter's resolve solidified. She would continue to fight, continue to lead, and continue to defend. The enemy had underestimated her. They would learn, painfully, that the medic among them was far more formidable than any soldier had imagined. The field hospital trembled under the roar of gunfire and the impact of distant explosions. Dust and debris hung in the air, making each breath heavy, each movement deliberate. Emily Carter crouched behind a barricade, her eyes scanning the advancing enemy with surgical precision. 45 attackers had come with confidence, expecting a quick victory over the medics and wounded soldiers. They had miscalculated. They had underestimated her. Emily's rifle rested comfortably against her shoulder, the cold metal grounding her as she took aim. Every target mattered. Every shot counted. She had memorized the enemy's advance patterns, noting their pacing, grouping, and overconfidence. From her concealed vantage point, she began to pick off the first wave. A rifleman fell silently to the ground, his squad unaware until panic rippled through their ranks. Another soldier, attempting to flank from the south, froze as Emily's shot found him, precision clean and lethal. Inside the hospital, the wounded watched in awe. Many had thought the chaos would overwhelm them, that this night would mark the end. But Emily moved through the battlefield like a shadow, decisive and unstoppable. Her calm contrasted the screaming and chaos, giving hope to those too injured to escape. "Stay down. Keep your heads low," she shouted, her voice firm and steady. The wounded obeyed, inspired by her control and confidence. Emily didn't just fire randomly. Every action was calculated. She repositioned constantly, moving from cover to cover, using overturned cots, medical carts, and debris to conceal her position. Each shot was planned, designed to disrupt, intimidate, and eliminate threats before they could reach the wounded. The enemy had assumed they could breach the hospital walls easily. Instead, they were met with a tactical nightmare, orchestrated by the medic they had laughed at. Outside, soldiers who had initially panicked began to find rhythm in Emily's leadership. They fired with renewed precision, covering corridors and choke points she had identified. Emily moved among them, adjusting their positions with quick, sharp orders. "Left flank. Fall back to the barricade. Hold that corner." Her commands were met without question. Every movement, every decision, created a symphony of defensive precision. The attackers were confused, disoriented by the resistance they hadn't anticipated. Emily's mind worked at a breakneck pace, analyzing trajectories, predicting enemy movements, and calculating probabilities. She saw a small squad attempting to rush a corridor where wounded soldiers lay vulnerable. She repositioned herself, firing in rapid succession, neutralizing 3 attackers in seconds. Their shock was evident. Who could have anticipated a medic moving with such lethal skill? Her presence inspired awe, fear, and disbelief. The soldiers who had once underestimated her now clung to every order, trusting her implicitly. The enemy regrouped for a second push, trying to exploit what they assumed were gaps in the hospital defenses. Emily anticipated this. She shifted positions silently, staying hidden until the perfect moment. Then, with pinpoint precision, she struck. Shots rang out from unexpected angles, taking down attackers before they could react. The hospital, though battered, became a maze of lethal strategy, with Emily as its unseen architect. Every corridor, every barricade, every movement she had rehearsed in her mind came alive under fire. Bullets whizzed past, ricocheting off metal walls and makeshift barricades, but Emily remained calm. Her breathing was steady, her focus absolute. The wounded clutched their blankets, eyes wide. Yet a glimmer of hope shone as they watched the medic defending them with unmatched skill. Emily's leadership transformed fear into action. Soldiers who had frozen now fought with courage, covering angles and executing her instructions flawlessly. Panic was replaced by precise, controlled resistance. Emily's strategy wasn't just about shooting. It was psychological. The enemy's overconfidence crumbled as they realized the medic was far more than a healer. Their coordinated assault faltered. Confusion spread, hesitation crept into their ranks. Every successful strike Emily made amplified the tension, sowing doubt among the attackers. One by one, their plans unraveled. The first wave had underestimated her, and now their morale was deteriorating rapidly. A sudden explosion outside shook the hospital walls, dust and debris filling the corridors. Emily's instincts kicked in. She moved swiftly, ensuring the wounded remained shielded, while simultaneously adjusting the firing positions of nearby soldiers. She guided them, corrected their aim, and coordinated their movements, all while maintaining lethal precision in her own attacks. Every decision she made was critical. Every second counted. Lives hung in the balance. The enemy attempted a flanking maneuver, moving through the eastern corridor. Emily anticipated their path, positioning herself behind an overturned medical cart. She waited, calm and patient, and when the first attacker appeared, she fired. The shot was clean, precise, and deadly. The remaining soldiers hesitated, confusion spreading like wildfire. Emily didn't pause. She continued moving from position to position, striking decisively, neutralizing threats before they could regroup. Inside the hospital, soldiers whispered in awe. "She's incredible," one muttered. Another shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. Emily didn't answer. Praise was irrelevant. Survival was paramount. She was not just a medic. She was the anchor, the command, the force ensuring that the hospital remained intact and every wounded soldier survived. Each move was calculated, each shot deliberate, each decision designed to maintain control amidst chaos. The first wave of attackers, having suffered heavy losses, began to falter. Confusion reigned among their ranks as they realized their advantage had been shattered. The numerical superiority they had relied on was meaningless against the tactical genius of a single medic. Emily's strategy, combined with her lethal precision, had turned the tide. 45 attackers had come with intent and arrogance. By the time the dust settled, many lay neutralized, their confidence shattered. Emily took a brief moment to breathe, her rifle still raised, eyes scanning every corridor and angle. The hospital walls were scarred, floors littered with spent shells, yet the wounded remained safe. The soldiers who had once doubted her leadership now followed her instructions without hesitation. She had proven that she was far more than just a medic. She was a strategist, a guardian, and a force capable of turning chaos into order. Outside, the enemy regrouped, uncertain of their next move. Emily anticipated their hesitation. She reinforced barricades, repositioned soldiers, and ensured that the wounded were safe from flanking attempts. Every movement was deliberate, every decision strategic. The first strike had been a decisive demonstration of her skill, but she knew the battle wasn't over. She was ready for the next wave. In the quiet moments between gunfire, Emily allowed herself a fleeting thought. She had changed the game. The soldiers who had laughed at the idea of a medic defending a battlefield now understood the truth. Her calm, precision, and lethal skill had turned a potential massacre into a calculated victory. She was no longer invisible. She was a leader, a fighter, and the reason the field hospital had survived the night. As dawn's light began to touch the valley, Emily remained vigilant. She scanned the horizon, aware that the enemy would test her defenses again. But for now, the first strike had succeeded. 45 attackers had been disrupted, neutralized, and broken. The hospital, though battered, stood as a testament to her skill. Emily Carter, the medic they had underestimated, had proven that courage, precision, and strategy could redefine the battlefield. And for the first time, amidst the smoke, blood, and chaos, a faint, determined smile touched her lips. She was ready for whatever came next. The first wave of attackers had been repelled, but Emily Carter knew the enemy would not surrender so easily. The faint light of dawn barely cut through the smoky haze over the field hospital, casting long, eerie shadows across shattered walls and scattered debris. Every footstep, every rustle of cloth, every distant shout made her muscles tighten with anticipation. She was exhausted, yet there was no time to rest. Survival demanded focus, and focus demanded action. Emily moved quickly through the hospital, surveying the battlefield. The wounded had been moved as far from danger as possible, but many were still exposed. She checked barricades, reinforcing weak points with whatever materials were at hand. Overturned tables, medical carts, sandbags, and even the occasional broken bed frame. The hospital was beginning to look less like a fragile refuge and more like a fortress, a product of Emily's careful orchestration. The enemy, realizing that their first wave had been ineffective, regrouped for a second, more aggressive push. They moved in tighter formations, attempting to coordinate flanking maneuvers. Emily anticipated their every move. Her mind, honed by years of training, calculated trajectories, distances, and likely points of entry. She repositioned soldiers with precision, directing their fire while ensuring that every wounded soldier remained shielded. Her calm presence inspired confidence. The panic that had once gripped the field hospital was replaced with controlled determination. Emily positioned herself near a reinforced barricade in the hospital's central corridor, her rifle ready. She observed enemy movements carefully, tracking patterns of approach. The second wave advanced cautiously, expecting resistance, but unaware of the full extent of her strategy. Emily waited patiently, a predator in her element, until the first attacker stepped into her line of sight. The shot was swift, clean, and decisive. Another followed, then another. One by one, the enemy fell, their confidence eroding with each calculated strike. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hospital, mingling with distant explosions outside. Dust and smoke thickened the air, reducing visibility and heightening tension. Emily moved fluidly from position to position, covering corridors and angles with precision. She was everywhere at once, an invisible force orchestrating the defense while simultaneously taking lethal action. The enemy had underestimated her, and they were paying the price. Amid the chaos, Emily noticed a squad attempting to flank through a side corridor. She quickly relayed instructions to a nearby soldier, positioning him to intercept the attackers. "Hold the corner. Don't fire until they're in sight," she commanded. Moments later, the enemy entered the trap she had prepared. The soldier fired with deadly accuracy, and the attackers fell into disarray. Emily's mind calculated the next moves even as she fired from her own position, taking down threats with unerring precision. Despite exhaustion clawing at her limbs, Emily's focus never wavered. Her every decision balanced risk and reward. She checked on the wounded, reinforcing their positions, and ensured soldiers remained in optimal defensive stances. Each action was deliberate, every movement precise. The enemy may have had numbers, but Emily had intelligence, strategy, and relentless determination on her side. The enemy, frustrated and confused, attempted a direct assault on the hospital's western barricade. Emily anticipated their move. She positioned herself behind a stack of sandbags, taking a low, concealed position that allowed her to cover multiple angles. Her first shots fell with deadly accuracy, hitting key targets and slowing the advance. The enemy hesitated, unsure of how to proceed against a medic who moved with the skill of a seasoned warrior. Emily's leadership extended beyond her own actions. Soldiers who had once been paralyzed with fear now executed her instructions with precision. She coordinated counterattacks, guiding them through the chaos, correcting mistakes instantly. The wounded, inspired by her calm determination, assisted where possible, creating a cohesive, disciplined defense out of what had initially been disorganized panic. Every corner, every corridor, every barricade became part of the strategic network, with Emily as its central node. Smoke, dust, and gunfire created a chaotic symphony. Emily moved between barricades, constantly adjusting, calculating, and reacting. She spotted an enemy attempting to breach the southern wing, signaling to a nearby soldier to intercept. As she fired from her concealed position, another attacker fell into her line of sight, neutralized before he could reach the wounded. Her precision and anticipation were unnerving to the enemy. Each strike reinforced their confusion, breaking their momentum and slowly eroding their morale. The hospital, though scarred and battered, became a fortress under Emily's guidance. Every movement she made was deliberate, designed to maximize defensive effectiveness while minimizing exposure. The enemy's confidence crumbled further as they realized the medic they had underestimated had outmaneuvered them at every turn. Emily's calm amidst chaos became a psychological weapon, turning fear into hesitation and hesitation into vulnerability. Hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Emily continued to move fluidly, taking strategic shots, repositioning soldiers, and reinforcing weak points. Every time the enemy attempted to regroup or coordinate, they were met with a counter that neutralized their advantage. Her tactical genius was evident not only in her own actions, but in the discipline she instilled in those around her. Soldiers who had doubted her now relied entirely on her leadership, moving with confidence where they had once feared to act. At one point, Emily paused briefly to check on a severely wounded soldier in the central ward. He looked up at her with fear and awe as she offered a reassuring nod. "You're safe. I've got this," she whispered. The soldier's eyes reflected renewed courage. Emily's ability to inspire was as vital as her ability to fight. She had become the linchpin of survival, holding the hospital together with a combination of strategy, skill, and unwavering resolve. The enemy's third attempt to breach the hospital began, more desperate than ever. Emily anticipated it, positioning herself to control the choke points. Every corridor was a trap, every barricade a calculated obstacle. Her movements were fluid and precise, firing only when necessary, maximizing efficiency while minimizing exposure. The attackers faltered, their strategy unraveling under her unrelenting precision. They had underestimated the medic's intelligence, courage, and tactical mastery. As dawn broke fully over the valley, the battle continued, but Emily's control over the hospital remained unshaken. The wounded were safe, soldiers were coordinated, and the enemy's momentum had been shattered. She moved among her team, reinforcing barricades, issuing orders, and maintaining vigilance. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. Every life she protected, every attack she neutralized, reinforced the truth. She was far more than just a medic. By the time the enemy began to retreat, disorganized and battered, Emily had established dominance over the battlefield. Her strategy, precision, and leadership had turned what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a controlled defensive victory. The hospital, though damaged, remained intact. The soldiers who had initially doubted her authority now followed her every instruction without hesitation. Emily had proven her worth, not just as a medic, but as a strategist and guardian. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, crouched behind the central barricade. The first strike had been decisive, but she knew the enemy would not surrender entirely. Her mind was already analyzing potential next moves, anticipating further assaults. Emily Carter's resolve had only strengthened. She had faced overwhelming odds and emerged in control. Against all odds, she had turned chaos into order and fear into disciplined action. For the soldiers in the hospital, Emily was no longer just a healer. She was a leader, a protector, and a warrior whose skill and courage had saved countless lives. And as the smoke cleared and the valley fell into a tense silence, Emily's eyes never wavered from the horizon. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The first light of dawn seeped through the tattered walls of the field hospital, casting pale streaks across the battered floors. Smoke still lingered in the air, dust mingled with the tongue of gunpowder, and the groans of the wounded punctuated the eerie calm. For a moment, it seemed the valley had been swallowed by silence, but Emily Carter knew better. The enemy, though disrupted and disoriented, was still out there calculating, regrouping, preparing for another push. Emily crouched behind a barricade, scanning the perimeter with unwavering focus. Her rifle rested against her shoulder, fingers flexed and ready. Every muscle, every instinct, was tuned for the next wave. The hospital had survived the first and second assaults, but she knew the enemy would not surrender. 45 attackers had underestimated her resolve, and now, in their desperation, they were likely to strike with renewed ferocity. Her mind raced with strategy. She had mapped every corridor, every window, every weak spot. Every barricade she had reinforced became part of a deadly network designed to channel the enemy into confined kill zones. The soldiers, inspired by her unwavering composure, had regained their confidence. They moved with precision, coordinating their defense as she directed. Emily's presence had transformed panic into disciplined action. The hospital, though scarred, had become an unyielding fortress. Suddenly, movement flickered along the tree line outside. Emily's instincts flared. She raised her rifle and took aim, tracking the first enemy soldier stepping into the field of view. One shot, precise and lethal, brought him down instantly. Another soldier attempted a flanking maneuver, only to be met with the combined fire of soldiers she had positioned strategically. Emily's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Hold your positions. Watch every corner. Don't let them flank. The enemy's third assault began with renewed aggression. They moved in tighter formations, attempting to overwhelm her defenses through sheer force. Emily anticipated every maneuver. She repositioned herself, moving from barricade to barricade, her rifle striking with deadly efficiency. Each enemy soldier she neutralized added a layer of chaos to their ranks. Confusion spread like wildfire. They had assumed the medic would be passive, a healer too gentle to fight. Now, they faced a force that was both guardian and executioner. Inside the hospital, the wounded clung to their blankets, wide-eyed yet inspired. Soldiers who had once frozen now executed her instructions flawlessly. Emily coordinated their fire, corrected their aim, and reinforced weak points while simultaneously engaging attackers herself. Her presence was everywhere at once, a ghostly force turning every corridor into a trap. The enemy faltered. Their confidence shattered. They began to retreat in disarray, but Emily did not allow them to regroup. She spotted a squad attempting to flee through the southern wing. Without hesitation, she signaled to a nearby soldier, "Cover the exit. Don't let them escape." In moments, her instructions were executed perfectly. Shots rang out, cutting off the enemy's retreat and forcing them back into the open, where Emily's aim found them one by one. Her strategy had turned their desperation into vulnerability, and she exploited it with ruthless precision. Every strike, every movement, was deliberate. Emily anticipated the enemy's psychology as much as their physical actions. Fear and confusion had become their greatest vulnerabilities. She manipulated both, channeling their mistakes into opportunities. Her soldiers moved with confidence, knowing that every command she gave was calculated and effective. The hospital was no longer a passive refuge. It had become a battlefield under her control. The enemy attempted one final assault, a coordinated effort to breach the central corridor where most of the wounded had been moved. Emily anticipated the attack before it began. She positioned herself behind a reinforced barricade, her rifle aimed at the most likely entry points. As the first attacker emerged, she fired with lethal precision. Another followed, only to be neutralized by a soldier she had stationed to cover that angle. Within minutes, the attackers' coordinated effort crumbled. Panic replaced strategy, and chaos consumed them entirely. Inside, the soldiers and wounded who had survived the night watched in awe. Emily moved among them, checking barricades, reinforcing weak points, and ensuring no one was left vulnerable. Her calm composure, tactical brilliance, and lethal efficiency had turned a desperate night into a controlled victory. She had faced overwhelming odds and emerged in command, her presence transforming fear into courage and chaos into order. The final moments of the battle were a blur of motion and calculation. Emily's rifle rang out repeatedly, each shot finding its mark. Soldiers followed her instructions flawlessly, cutting off enemy escape routes and neutralizing remaining threats. The attackers, once confident and aggressive, now fled the battlefield in disarray. 45 men had entered the hospital with intent and arrogance. By the time the last of them retreated into the valley, their ranks had been decimated and their confidence shattered. Emily allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, crouched behind a barricade amidst the aftermath. The hospital was battered, floors littered with spent shells and debris, but it had survived. The wounded were safe, and the soldiers who had doubted her leadership now looked to her with awe and respect. She had transformed a place of vulnerability into a fortress, a battleground into a controlled arena of strategy and survival. Her mind, however, remained alert. She knew the enemy might attempt to regroup and return, though the chances were slim after the devastating loss they had suffered. She reinforced barricades, checked ammunition, and ensured every wounded soldier was secure. Every movement, every decision, reinforced the lesson she had taught the enemy. Underestimate Emily Carter at your own peril. Outside, the valley was quiet now, the echoes of gunfire fading into the distance. The first light of dawn illuminated the destruction, highlighting the scars of battle etched into walls and floors. Soldiers moved cautiously, surveying the battlefield, ensuring no hidden threats remained. Emily stood at the center, rifle lowered, but eyes alert, taking in the aftermath of the night's chaos. Her calm determination had been the key to victory. Her strategy, skill, and courage had turned what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a decisive triumph. The soldiers who had survived the night began to gather, eyes wide with gratitude and awe. One approached Emily, voice trembling. We couldn't have done this without you. You're amazing." Emily offered a faint, tired smile, shaking her head. Praise was unnecessary. Survival and protection had been her mission, and she had fulfilled it. Every life she had saved was reward enough. As the sun rose fully over the valley, Emily moved through the hospital once more, checking barricades and attending to the wounded. The enemy's assault had ended, but the responsibility of care remained. Her dual role as medic and battlefield strategist defined her, and she carried it with quiet strength. She had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, proving that courage, skill, and intelligence could redefine what it meant to survive. For Emily Carter, the battle had been a test of skill, strategy, and resolve. She had faced 45 armed attackers, coordinated a defense under extreme pressure, and protected the lives of the wounded and her fellow soldiers. The night had been a crucible, and she had emerged not only unbroken but triumphant. She was no longer just a medic. She was a guardian, a leader, and a warrior whose legend would endure in the memories of everyone who had witnessed her in action. And as the morning light bathed the hospital in its golden glow, Emily's gaze shifted toward the distant mountains, vigilant, prepared, and unyielding. The battle was over, but the war, like her duty, would continue. She had proven that against all odds, courage and strategy could turn the tide. She had won the night. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the valley, casting a warm glow over the battered field hospital. Dust swirled lazily in the light, and the sharp tongue of gunpowder still clung to the air. The echoes of the night's chaos had faded, leaving only the soft groans of the wounded and the quiet hum of soldiers taking stock of the battlefield. Emily Carter leaned against a sandbag, her rifle resting by her side, chest heaving from exhaustion, yet eyes still sharp and vigilant. She had survived the night, but the aftermath demanded attention. The hospital was a scene of controlled chaos. Broken cots, scattered supplies, and bullet-riddled walls bore silent testimony to the ferocity of the enemy assault. Emily moved among the wounded, checking 4 lines, bandages, and vitals. Her hands, though smeared with blood some her own, most from those she had fought to protect, moved with practiced precision. Each patient was a reminder of the stakes, of why she had pushed herself beyond fatigue, fear, and expectation. Every life saved was proof of the night's victories. Soldiers emerged from their positions, cautiously surveying the battlefield. Eyes wide with disbelief, they glanced at Emily, the woman who had commanded, fought, and protected with uncanny precision. Many had doubted her ability before the night, seeing her only as a medic. Now, they approached with a mixture of reverence and awe. One young private, still trembling from adrenaline and fear, whispered to another, "I can't believe she did all that by herself." Emily overheard, but offered no words. Her focus was on the wounded, on ensuring nothing had been overlooked. Recognition would come. She knew it always did, but first, duty. The enemy had been forced to retreat. 45 attackers had entered the hospital with arrogance, expecting an easy victory. They left scattered, disorganized, and defeated, a testament to Emily's tactical brilliance and calm under fire. Soldiers scoured the surrounding areas, checking for stragglers and ensuring no traps remained. Emily's strategy had turned a potentially disastrous night into a controlled victory. Her mind, however, remained alert. In war, vigilance never ends, and she had learned long ago that overconfidence could be fatal. Commanders arrived soon after, surveying the aftermath. Officers who had been skeptical of her abilities were now witnesses to her extraordinary performance. One approached Emily, eyes narrowing in respect. "Carter, you've done what no one expected," he said, his tone a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Emily simply nodded, exhausted but steady. The night's events had demanded more than courage. They had demanded precision, foresight, and relentless determination. She had given all three. The wounded were stabilized, and the remaining soldiers were accounted for. Emily moved through the hospital one final time, checking that everyone was safe. She allowed herself a moment to observe the broader scene. The valley quiet now, the enemy gone, the hospital standing despite being scarred and battered. Each scar, each mark, was a testament to the resilience of those who had survived. Emily's leadership had been the linchpin of that survival. She had transformed fear into action, chaos into order, and vulnerability into defense. As she walked through the hallways, she began to notice small gestures of recognition. Soldiers, once hesitant or doubtful, offered nods of respect. Nurses, previously focused on their own tasks, paused to glance at her with gratitude. The wounded, some unable to speak, met her eyes with a mixture of relief and admiration. In those silent exchanges, Emily understood something profound. Her role had extended far beyond medicine. She had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the unexpected power of determination. Commanders gathered the soldiers for a debriefing. Emily stood slightly apart, observing. Reports were given, recounting the details of the night's battle. Each story mentioned her, the quiet medic who had orchestrated defense, neutralized attackers, and protected the wounded with precision and bravery. Some struggled to believe it. How could one woman, armed primarily with medical tools and a rifle, achieve what so many had thought impossible? Yet the evidence was undeniable. Every survivor bore witness. Eventually, Emily was called forward. The room grew silent as all eyes turned to her. She stepped into the center, her posture calm but resolute, shoulders squared despite fatigue. An admiral, flanked by senior officers, approached. "Emily Carter," he began, voice carrying authority and admiration. "Your actions tonight have saved countless lives. Your courage, skill, and leadership are beyond commendation. You have shown what it means to protect, to lead, and to fight when others might falter. You are no longer just a medic, you are a warrior, and your heroism will not be forgotten." A murmur of agreement swept through the assembled soldiers. Emily felt a faint warmth rise in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Praise had never been her goal. Saving lives had been. Yet the recognition mattered not for ego, but as validation that courage, preparation, and skill could redefine what was possible in the darkest moments. Medals and commendations were presented later. Emily received each with quiet dignity, acknowledging the recognition with a nod rather than words. The ceremonial acknowledgement, though meaningful, was secondary to the real victory, the lives she had protected and the lives that could now continue thanks to her actions. Soldiers who had witnessed her bravery shared stories, laughing nervously at moments of tension, crying quietly at close calls, and marveling at her composure. Emily listened, offering smiles and quiet reassurances, understanding that her presence had inspired hope beyond mere survival. The aftermath of the battle lingered in the valley. Soldiers rebuilt barricades, repaired damaged areas, and tended to the wounded. Emily moved among them, lending a hand where needed, always vigilant. She checked ammunition, reinforced weak points, and ensured that everyone was accounted for. Even in moments of relative calm, she remained alert, understanding that war was unpredictable and that vigilance saved lives. As the day progressed, Emily finally allowed herself a brief respite. She sat on a low barricade, rifle resting beside her, eyes scanning the valley. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and dust, but also the promise of survival. Soldiers moved with renewed confidence, nurses worked with efficiency, and the wounded were stable. She had orchestrated the defense, neutralized the enemy, and ensured that every life within the hospital had been protected. The impossible had been achieved. In the quiet moments, Emily reflected on the night. 45 attackers had entered the field hospital expecting an easy victory. They had underestimated the quiet, composed medic who was more strategist than healer, more warrior than civilian. She had turned fear into action, chaos into precision, and vulnerability into strength. The experience had tested every skill she possessed, yet she had emerged not only unbroken but triumphant. Stories of her heroism spread quickly, first among her fellow soldiers, then through command channels. Emily's actions became legendary, not because she sought fame, but because her courage, skill, and leadership had set an example that could inspire generations. She had redefined what it meant to be a medic in combat, proving that intelligence, bravery, and tactical mastery could overcome overwhelming odds. As the sun climbed higher, Emily finally allowed herself to rest, leaning against the sandbags with her eyes closed. The valley was calm now, but she remained vigilant, always aware that life on the battlefield demanded readiness. Her thoughts drifted to the soldiers she had protected, the wounded she had stabilized, and the lives she had saved. Recognition and medals were secondary. The true reward was knowing that her courage had made a difference, that she had turned despair into hope, and that the night's terror had ended with triumph. Emily Carter, the medic they had underestimated, had become more than a soldier, more than a healer. She had become a symbol of courage, strategy, and resilience, proof that determination, skill, and leadership could redefine what was possible. The field hospital, battered but standing, bore witness to her extraordinary actions. And as she rose to move through the valley once more, ready to continue her duty, one truth remained undeniable. Emily Carter had turned a night of terror into a story of heroism that would endure forever.